The truth of a child's identity can fracture families, ignite doubt, and expose buried secrets too painful for silence to contain. The small claims courtroom was not built for this kind of drama, but it unfolded there with the weight of ancient tragedy. The cameras whirred softly, their red lights blinking like watchful eyes, capturing every flicker of hesitation, every tremor of a voice, every measured breath. Judge Judy Shindlin sat elevated behind her bench, her posture sharp, her gaze sharper, radiating the kind of authority that pressed even the strongest personalities into honesty, or at least into caution. In the plaintiff's seat sat a young woman, Russell, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She tried to look composed, but her knuckles whitened as her fingers dug into each other. The tension around her mouth betrayed nerves that even practiced poise could not mask. She was here for money, technically, a civil complaint filed on paper. But what the papers did not carry, what the complaint could not fully spell out, was the true weight of the case, the legitimacy of a child's fatherhood, the possibility of betrayal, the collision of love, timing, and truth. Across from her in the defendant's seat sat Mr. McNulty. He looked restless, his leg bouncing beneath the table, eyes fixed at some invisible spot ahead of him. His jaw was set in a rigid line, the kind that spoke of frustration barely contained. He had the air of someone who had been blindsided before, someone who had lived months in the shadow of doubt, someone who carried the heavy contradiction of being told he was and was not a father. The audience in the gallery was unusually hushed. They, like the cameras, seemed to sense that this was not the usual dispute over a broken lease or an unpaid loan. This was about lineage, about a child's name, about truth that had been twisted, hidden, or misunderstood. And Judge Judy, with her instinct for cutting through obfuscation, was circling closer and closer to it. Her first questions had been precise, aimed like arrows at dates and timelines. "You and Mr. McNulty ever lived together?" "Yes, we did," Russell replied, her voice flat, almost reluctant. "From when to when?" She recited the dates with mechanical precision. September 1st to November 12th. Judge Judy's brows arched. "Of last year?" "Yes, of 2016. But that was after your daughter was born." Russell hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, that's correct." The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing. The weight of silence lingered before she delivered the next blow. "I'm talking about prior to her birth." "No." The word fell heavy, too sharp and too quick. It was the kind of denial that revealed as much as it concealed. McNulty's head shifted slightly, his eyes tightening as if he had just been stung. "And at the time that she was born, were you and the defendant still dating?" "No." "When did you stop dating?" "In September of 2015. It was clinical, factual, but the courtroom air thickened with each answer, as if time itself was reconstructing the months in question, piecing together a story in which love, separation, and uncertainty intertwined. Judge Judy picked up the complaint, flipping it open with a crisp motion. "Your complaint indicated in the first couple of lines that Mr. McNulty did not know he had a child due to some, you used the word mix-up, for the first 4 months of her life." "Mm-hmm." Russell's hum was non-committal, her lips pressed thin. "Was that a mix-up because there was someone else who was originally named as the father?" The question sliced through the pretense. Russell's throat bobbed with a swallow, her gaze dropping for the briefest second before she forced herself to look back at Judy. "There was. I was dating someone." McNulty's shoulders stiffened. Even though he had likely heard this before, the courtroom made everything more permanent, more damning. The admission was now immortalized in testimony. "Okay," Judy continued, her tone as sharp as glass. "So there was someone else who was named as the father. And what prompted you to take another step towards finding that Mr. McNulty, who actually had a paternity test, was the father of the child?" Russell's lips parted, but before her explanation could form, McNulty's voice broke through, firm but tinged with disbelief. "He contacted me asking for it. Paternity test." Judy's eyes shifted swiftly. "Is that right?" "Yes, ma'am." Russell's reply was quiet, almost sheepish. "Why?" the defendant exhaled, his words emerging in a rush, unvarnished and raw. Honestly, it was crazy how I found out about it. I just found out through a picture online and I saw that the child looked like me. And I just kind of had this crazy hunch that it might be mine. So I contacted her and got the paternity test done, and the unfinished sentence hung in the air like a thundercloud. The courtroom shifted. The audience leaned forward as though pulled by gravity. A picture online, a child that looked like him, a hunch that carried enough force to upend lives. Russell's face betrayed a flicker of discomfort. She had not expected this to be the moment. She had not expected him to put the raw discovery into words with such blunt force, because to admit it was to reopen wounds, to admit that the truth of her daughter's fatherhood was not a gentle unfolding, but a shock, a revelation stumbled upon in the unlikeliest way. Judge Judy's pen tapped against her notes. Once, twice. Her eyes, piercing as ever, studied both parties. She knew the weight of moments like this. She had overseen thousands of cases, but in every few dozen, a truth emerged that was heavier than the financial claim on paper. She had learned to recognize the pulse of a case when it transformed from dispute to confession, from complaint to confessionary theater. "You saw a photograph." Her voice was steady. "Yes," McNulty confirmed. His voice carried conviction, but beneath it a tremor of something else. Fear, maybe, or the hollow ache of lost time. "And I knew. I just knew." Russell's gaze slid toward him. For the first time, something softened in her eyes. Perhaps it was guilt. Perhaps it was sorrow. Perhaps it was the memory of choices made in confusion and desperation. Judy let the silence grow, unhurried. She knew silence could do more work than questions. Silence forced people to fill it with truth or with lies that revealed themselves in the very act of denial. When she finally spoke again, her tone carried the same precise edge that had already cut through so much. "So, you invited her to move in." The arrangement was uneasy from the start, though neither admitted it aloud. Two adults, bound by a child but not by love, cohabiting under one roof as though rehearsing a life neither had chosen. The house itself bore the tension like invisible static. Its walls listened, its doors absorbed whispered conversations. Its rooms carried the sharp division between duty and desire, between what was said and what was left unsaid. McNulty's house stood in a modest neighborhood of Indiana, a two-story structure with aging shutters and a front porch that sagged faintly under the weight of time. Inside, the atmosphere was a blend of fresh beginnings and unhealed fractures. 3 bedrooms defined the new family order. The daughter's room, painted quickly in soft pastels with toys scattered like fragile promises of stability. Russell's room, functional and plain, a bed pressed against one wall, boxes still stacked as if she had not fully unpacked her life. McNulty's room, the largest, but sparsely decorated, his bachelorhood lingering in the form of a mattress, a dresser, and framed photos of old hunting trips. For him, the house was no longer a bachelor's retreat. It was now the crucible of fatherhood. McNulty rose each morning with a weight in his chest, the awareness that overnight his role in the world had shifted. He was not a man who had gradually prepared for parenthood. He was a man who had been thrust into it, a father by revelation rather than planning. He looked at his daughter, tiny, fragile, her breast sweet with sleep, and felt both awe and terror. Awe at the miracle that she was his, flesh of his flesh. Terror at the enormity of the responsibility, at the possibility that he might fail her. Russell carried herself differently. Her decision to accept McNulty's invitation was less about eagerness than necessity. She had been living with her sister in Lafayette, a liminal space between reliance and independence. Moving into McNulty's house gave her proximity to the child's father, but it also tethered her to a man with whom romance had long since ended. She entered the house with guarded acceptance, like someone stepping into a fragile truce. She was not in love with him, not seeking reconciliation, but she could not deny the security it offered. A roof, a nursery for her daughter, a chance to catch her breath. At night, after the baby was asleep, the air thickened with unspoken words. McNulty sometimes lingered in the hallway, listening to the faint hum of a lullaby drifting from Russell's room. He told himself it was about the baby, about making sure she was safe. But beneath the surface was a different hunger, the ache of a man who wanted family, who wanted permanence, who wanted to claim what had been denied him in those lost first months. He respected the boundaries they had set. No romance, just co-parenting. But his heart did not always obey the rules his mouth had agreed to. Russell, for her part, sensed the undercurrent. She saw the way his eyes lingered, the way his voice softened when speaking to her, the way he moved too quickly to help. It wasn't unwelcome, but it wasn't reciprocated either. She had already closed that chapter in her life. For her, this was not about rekindling love. It was about partnership in parenting, about survival. Judge Judy, sitting high above the courtroom, recognized the brittle edges of such arrangements. Her years of listening to fractured families had honed her instincts. The way Russell answered her questions with guarded restraint, the way McNulty's voice carried both frustration and longing. These were signs of a story far deeper than the legal complaint in her hands. She leaned into that tension, probing carefully, her questions sharp but deliberate. "When you moved into Mr. McNulty's house, you have a house?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "How many bedrooms are in the house?" "3. Your daughter had one bedroom?" "Correct." "Did you have the other?" "Yes." "And Mr. McNulty the third?" "Yes." Her pen tapped against the bench, a metronome of logic. "So you were living there as two parents of a child? You were not a couple. Is that a fair statement?" "Yes," Russell confirmed. The word hung in the air. It was a confirmation of the facade they both carried. Two parents under one roof, but not lovers. Two adults living parallel lives, tethered only by a child's heartbeat. The audience stirred, sensing the precariousness of such an arrangement. It was the kind of living situation that could hold together for weeks, maybe months, but inevitably bent under the weight of human emotions. Resentment, desire, misunderstanding. The child's room became the heart of the house, the only neutral space where tensions dissolved. Both parents gravitated there, speaking in softer tones, their conflicts muted by the sound of their daughter's giggles. But outside that sanctuary, the lines hardened. Whose turn was it to buy groceries? Who was paying the utility bill? How late was too late for Russell to come home from work? Did McNulty have the right to question her choices, given they were not together? Did she have the right to assert authority in his home, given he had invited her as a guest? Every domestic question became a battle line. Co-parenting as an ideal was simple. Co-parenting under one roof, without romance, was a minefield. McNulty wrestled with the contradiction daily. He told himself it was enough just to be near his daughter, to hear her laughter echo down the hallway, to tuck her in at night. But his heart yearned for something deeper, for the recognition of family, for the security of being more than just a convenient roommate. He wanted to believe that the three of them could form a unit, even if Russell resisted. He wanted permanence. Russell, meanwhile, clung to her independence. She knew how easily a line could blur, how quickly living under one roof could breed expectations. She reminded herself daily she was there for her daughter, not for him. The moment she could stand on her own feet again, she would. Judge Judy sensed it all. Her questions, deceptively simple, carried the weight of revelation. She leaned forward, eyes fixed on Russell. "So you were living there as two parents of a child. You were not a couple. Is that a fair statement?" "Yes," came the reply again, firmer this time. The courtroom hushed. The answer was clear, but the truth was murkier. It was an arrangement destined for conflict. The judge, with her sharp instincts, knew where to go next. She closed her file with a crisp snap, her gaze sweeping between plaintiff and defendant, the silence in the room tightening like a drawn bow. Her next words would pivot the case from arrangement to incident, from background to climax. She spoke slowly, deliberately, her voice carrying the weight of inevitability. Now an incident occurred. The first weeks inside McNulty's house were strangely calm, almost deceptively so. Russell told herself she had made the right decision, that moving in had been a mature step toward building a sense of family for her daughter. McNulty had been attentive, even gentle at times, eager to prove himself. He came home with toys, asked careful questions about feeding schedules, and seemed genuinely invested in learning the rituals of fatherhood. For a while, Russell allowed herself to believe in the picture he painted, the dream of co-parenting, perhaps even the faint echo of a family unit. She saw it in the way he bent low to kiss their daughter goodnight, in the way he adjusted his own routines to fit hers. Maybe she thought they could create something functional, even peaceful. But beneath that veneer of cooperation, fault lines began to spread. They were not lovers, and they did not share the quiet intimacy of a couple. Instead, they orbited each other with subtle tension, every interaction edged with unspoken history. McNulty, though insistent that his only goal was to co-parent, carried himself with a restless energy. He wanted more than daily logistics about diapers and bills. He wanted companionship, recognition, maybe even forgiveness. Russell, however, kept her distance. She saw his eagerness not as stability, but as pressure. What he called partnership, she often read as control. When she stayed out late with friends, his questions felt invasive. When he bought groceries, she wondered if he would later hold the receipt over her head. The balance of gratitude and autonomy began to tilt. Judge Judy in the courtroom months later captured the contradiction in a single breath. Her incredulity cut through Russell's testimony. "Would you like to explain to me, Ms. Russell, why this man who actually tried, at least on the surface, to do everything in an appropriate fashion, contacted you to find out whether he had a child, bore the expense probably of a paternity test, found out that this was, in fact, his child, and you were, for all intents and purposes, homeless. You didn't have your own residence. He invited you to come to stay in his house, your own bedroom, because he wanted to. He uses the word co-parent. He wanted to be closer to his child. You want to tell me why he would do such dastardly things? You want to tell me what happened in November?" The judge's voice was steel wrapped in skepticism, and the gallery leaned forward, waiting for Russell to explain. Russell's chin lifted, her voice low but defensive. "I did pay for the entire paternity test. I also was living comfortably at my sister's. I had my own room." The distinction mattered to her. She was not destitute, not clinging to McNulty for survival. She wanted the record to reflect that. Judy didn't let her off so easily. "Well, then why would you go to his house?" Russell's hands twisted in her lap. "'Cause I thought I was doing the right thing and letting my daughter's father be in her life." "She can be in his life many, many ways," Judy snapped back. "He wanted us to be closer, and he gave us this dream of being a happy family. And little did I know, until I moved in, that he was not the person I thought he was." The statement hung heavy, the courtroom catching its breath. Russell's words carried accusation, painting McNulty not as a dutiful father, but as a man whose charm masked something darker. "Okay," Judge Judy said, her tone sharp but inviting revelation. "Let's move on to November. Tell me what happened." The calm before the storm, the nights leading to November, carried an undercurrent of unease. Russell noticed changes in McNulty. His silences grew heavier, his mood shifting from hopeful to brooding. He had moments of short temper, small flashes of irritation when she rebuffed his attempts at conversation. He came home later than usual, smelling faintly of alcohol, brushing off her questions with tight smiles. The house itself began to feel less like a sanctuary and more like a staging ground. Russell spent more evenings in her room, doors closed, music playing softly to drown the silence. McNulty drifted in and out of the house like a storm cloud, alternating between overcompensating kindness and unsettling distance. Their daughter, too young to understand, became the unspoken bridge that kept them under the same roof. It was in this tension that November arrived. The night of fracture, one night, long after Russell had settled into bed, the sound of the front door jolted her awake. The clock on her nightstand glowed past midnight. At first, she thought nothing of it. McNulty had been keeping odd hours. But then came the laughter. A woman's laughter, unfamiliar and sharp, floated up the stairs. Russell sat up, heart pounding, the realization crashing in. She crept to her door, cracked it open, and listened. McNulty's voice, slurred but playful, echoed in the living room. The clink of glasses, the shuffle of shoes against hardwood, the unmistakable intimacy of voices too close. Her stomach nodded. She wasn't his partner. Not anymore. But this was her daughter's home. This was supposed to be their fragile attempt at stability. To bring another woman here, drunk, loud, careless. It felt like a betrayal of the very foundation he had promised. Russell stepped into the hallway, her bare feet cold against the floor. She descended the stairs slowly, her pulse hammering in her ears. The living room light spilled across the floorboards. And there they were. McNulty slouched on the couch, arm draped across the backrest, his eyes glassy. Beside him, a woman laughing, her hair falling in glossy waves, her presence both foreign and invasive. Russell's voice cracked through the room. "What is this?" The woman startled, glancing from Russell to McNulty. He straightened, blinking as though reality had suddenly returned. "It's nothing, just a friend. In the middle of the night, in front of my daughter's bedroom?" Her voice rose, sharp and shaking. The argument ignited like dry tinder. McNulty, emboldened by alcohol, dismissed her anger, waving his hand as though she were overreacting. Russell, fueled by indignation, lashed back. Their voices collided, the fragile truce shattering into accusation and defense. The woman gathered her purse, muttering apologies, and slipped out the door. But the damage had been done. From that night forward, the house was no longer uneasy, it was hostile. Escalation. McNulty grew defensive, his frustrations spilling into daily life. He accused Russell of judging him unfairly, of holding him to impossible standards. He reminded her that she was living under his roof, that he had extended the invitation. Russell, in turn, hardened. She reminded him that the house was not about him, it was about their daughter. She insisted that his choices, his recklessness, affected not just her, but their child. The more he pressed, the more she pulled away. The dream of co-parenting, once fragile, now lay in shards. Each day brought new arguments, about money, about time, about respect. Each night simmered with silence, thick with resentment. And then came November 12th. The day began quietly, deceptively so. Russell tried to go about her routine, folding laundry, playing with her daughter in the pastel-painted room that had once felt safe. McNulty left the house earlier than usual, his mood unreadable. Russell hoped the distance might cool the tension, might give them both room to breathe. But when he returned that evening, the storm finally broke. Hay lived under the same roof, not while their daughter slept down the hall, was shattered once again. Judge Judy's courtroom voice broke through the memory, crisp and sharp. "So he came home. What date?" Russell's voice trembled as she answered. "It was November 12th, I believe. He came home inebriated with a girl for the third time, and we had an agreement that he would not bring home women while we were living there for the safety of our child and for respect." "Just a second," Judy interrupted, pen poised. "When did you make this agreement?" "After we decided we weren't going to have an intimate relationship." "In what month was that?" "That was September." "Okay, so shortly after you came in." "Yes." The courtroom hushed again. The audience leaned in, watching Russell's eyes glisten with the memory of that night. The breaking point. Russell descended the stairs slowly, every step measured, her body taut with fear. She found them in the living room, McNulty sprawled on the couch, drink in hand, the young woman beside him, giggling at something he had slurred. The sight stung, not jealousy but betrayal. This was her daughter's home, their daughter's sanctuary. It wasn't supposed to be a revolving door of strangers. "Do you remember our agreement?" Russell's voice was sharp, cracking through the haze. McNulty's head lifted, his eyes bloodshot. "It's my house," he slurred. "I can do what I want." The woman beside him shifted uncomfortably, glancing between them. "This isn't about you," Russell snapped at her, then turned her fury back to him. "This is about our daughter. You promised me." Her words carried the weight of September, the fragile negotiation that had allowed her to move in. She thought he had meant it, that he would keep the house sacred for their child's sake. But McNulty, intoxicated and defensive, bristled at her tone. "Don't talk to me like that into my house," he growled, lurching to his feet. His height and sudden motion made the room shrink, the air tighten. Russell stepped back, but her chin stayed high. "You're disrespecting me. You're disrespecting her." The young woman stood, clutching her purse, muttering apologies, and hurried out into the night. The front door slammed, leaving the two of them alone. That was when the storm truly broke. Violence in the living room. The courtroom gasped when Russell, her voice breaking, told Judge Judy, "He, in a rage, headbutted me twice, threw me against a wall. I got away from him by pushing all I could away from the wall and running to get my cell phone to call the police, which I did. In memory, the moment unfolded in jagged fragments. The smell of alcohol on his breath, the force of his forehead crashing into hers, the blur of pain that spread across her skull. The wall caught her next, her body slamming into it with a sickening thud. Her arms flailed, pushing, clawing, anything to break free. Her daughter's faint cry from upstairs pierced the chaos, small and terrified. Russell's instincts roared awake. She tore herself from his grip, stumbling toward her bedroom, grabbing her cell phone with trembling hands. Her fingers fumbled across the screen, dialing, pleading into the receiver. The operator's voice steadied her enough to stay upright. The sirens came quickly after, flashing red and blue across the windows, cutting through the drunken haze that had swallowed the house. The police arrived. When the officers entered, the house felt divided between silence and wreckage. Russell clutched her daughter, her face swollen where his forehead had struck. McNulty, chest heaving, reeked of alcohol but tried to stand tall, insisting it wasn't what it looked like. His words tumbled out, half defense, half denial, as if he could rewrite the night by sheer will. One officer took Russell aside, listening carefully as she recounted the blows, the wall, the escape. Her voice cracked but held steady enough to convey the danger. Another officer confronted McNulty, his slurred protests fading under the weight of authority. Finally, one officer turned to him, voice flat. "You've got two choices. You can come with us tonight, or you can leave." McNulty's eyes flickered between the officers, Russell, and the small child peeking from her mother's arms. For a moment, his bravado faltered, and the reality of the situation pressed in. Jail or exile? "I'll leave," he muttered. He grabbed his coat, the door yawning open as he stepped into the cold night. The house, once filled with shouting and struggle, sank into silence. Russell collapsed onto the couch, clutching her daughter tightly, her tears soaking into the child's hair. In court, the memory replayed. Judge Judy listened intently, her face unreadable, though her eyes flashed with sharpness. She had seen many couples clash in her courtroom, but the layers here, the child, the broken pack, the violence, were heavier than most. "Where did you sleep?" she asked, turning to McNulty, her tone clipped. "I went to my buddies down the street after the police officer told me to leave," he admitted, his voice subdued. "He gave me the option of going to jail or leave, so I left." The gallery whispered, the weight of his words settling. Even stripped of alcohol, McNulty's version revealed the stark truth. He had been forced out, his presence too dangerous to remain under the same roof as his daughter and her mother. The courtroom's silence pulsed with the unspoken question. What now? What remained between them after such a night, after violence replaced trust, after the fragile hope of co-parenting shattered against the wall like broken glass? The answer hung in limbo, waiting for Judy's judgment, waiting for the truth to settle. The courtroom air had settled into a brittle quiet, broken only by the scrape of Judge Judy's pen against her notepad. The November violins lingered like smoke in the gallery's collective imagination, but Judy was already pivoting. She didn't deal in catharsis. She dealt in facts, claims, and damages. "Let's move on," she said, her voice crisp, the gavel of her tone cutting through lingering emotion. "You have 3 complaints. Your complaint is that he took your phone." The words landed like stones in a pond, rippling outward. Russell nodded, her face pale but resolute. The phone had been her lifeline, her contact to the outside world, her shield the night she fled to call police. Losing it felt less like a theft and more like an erasure of independence. McNulty shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening. His leg began its familiar bounce, his gaze flickering toward the floor. He had prepared for this moment, ready to defend, ready to spin. "Second," Judy continued, flipping a page with a flick of her wrist. "Your car. You say he damaged your car. How?" Russell inhaled, her voice steadier now. "When we argued, he went outside and struck the front fender. Dented it, scratched the paint." "Do you have photographs?" Judy asked immediately, her tone sharp as a scalpel. "Yes, Your Honor." She pulled an envelope from her folder, her fingers trembling as she slid the glossy prints across to the clerk. Judy peered at them through narrowed eyes, holding one aloft. "This?" "Yes, taken the next morning." McNulty leaned forward, his voice low, defensive. I didn't do that. Could have been anybody. The car was parked on the street. Of course, Judy replied dryly, lips curling into the faintest smirk. Cars dent themselves all the time. Must be magic. Laughter rippled softly through the gallery, quickly silenced by her glare. Third, she said, her pen tapping against the desk. You claim he threw your property out. Russell nodded again, her voice tightening. Some of my belongings, clothes, books, a small television. He tossed them onto the lawn. Okay, Judy leaned back slightly. So, phone, car, belongings. Those are your three claims, correct? Yes, Your Honor. The courtroom hung in suspense, every eye darting between Russell's determination, McNulty's tightening defenses, and Judy's sharp control. Evidence and denials. Russell unfolded receipts, placing them carefully on the plaintiff's table. The neatness of the gesture betrayed how desperately she wanted order out of chaos. One was for the television, another for the phone. The phone was $329, she explained. The television was $479.91. I bought both within the year. McNulty's head shook, slow and deliberate. I never touched her phone. She probably lost it herself. And the TV? That was hers. Fine, but I didn't break it. I put it outside because she was leaving. That's not destruction. Judge Judy's gaze sliced toward him. When you put someone's property outside in anger, Mr. McNulty, you run the risk of damage. Do you understand? His lips parted, then closed again. No answer. Russell pressed forward, her voice rising with urgency. I even brought bank statements. Look, right here. Proof of purchase. She held them aloft, her hand trembling with both nerves and determination. Judy's pen tapped twice. I don't care about how you paid. I care about the value at the time of loss. That's what we're dealing with here. Russell faltered, her mouth opening, then closing again. She wanted to explain more, to tell Judy about the chaos, the fear, the night she slept with her child's crib pressed against the door. But she saw the judge's expression and understood. This courtroom was not about emotional wreckage. It was about math, the balance of authority. McNulty straightened, sensing his chance. Your Honor, she's exaggerating. She was living comfortably at her sister's before. I opened my home, tried to co-parent, and now she's turning it into a list of complaints. I never wanted a fight. I just wanted to be there for my daughter. The words rang with half-truth. They sounded noble, but the edge of defensiveness betrayed his fear. The courtroom had stripped away his control, his ability to rewrite the past in private. Judge Judy didn't flinch. Mr. McNulty, this is not about what you wanted. This is about property. Property that either was or was not damaged. She paused, scanning the papers before her. Okay, so the television set was $479.91. Russell nodded quickly, relief flickering across her face. Judy looked up, her eyes cold steel. What are these things? Russell tried to speak, her voice overlapping itself. Receipts, photos, a list of the items he threw out. I don't care. Judy's voice cracked across the room like a whip. I don't need a shopping list. I need clarity. Do you understand? Russell froze, her papers still clutched in her hands. I don't care how many receipts you have, Judy continued, sharper still. Judgment doesn't come from your persistence. It comes from facts. The anticlimax, the courtroom held its breath as Judy finished her arithmetic. Her pen scratched quickly, numbers tumbling onto paper like the closing notes of a symphony. Judgment for the plaintiff, she announced, her tone abrupt, final, leaving no room for appeal, in the amount of $994. The number landed in the air with a thud, small, almost pitiful, compared to the storm of betrayal, violence, and broken trust that had unfolded in testimony. $994, a sum that could barely account for a single sleepless night, let alone months of fear and upheaval. Russell blinked, her shoulders stiffening. She had won, technically. Yet the victory tasted hollow, like dust in her mouth. McNulty exhaled, a mix of relief and resentment tightening his jaw. Less than $1,000. He could live with that, he told himself. But inside, he knew the figure meant more than money. It was a public mark against him, a declaration of fault etched into the record. The gallery shifted, murmuring softly, as though collectively recognizing the strange anticlimax. Russell tried once more, her voice breaking through. "Your Honor, I still have evidence." But Judy's gavel of words slammed down. "We're done, we're done." The silence that followed was absolute. Aftermath. "Well, that's what the police officer says," Judy concluded, her eyes fixed firmly on McNulty. "We're done, Mikhail." She snapped her file shut, the sound final, irrevocable. Bird, her faithful bailiff, turned to the courtroom with his familiar cadence. "Parties are excused. You may step out." The spell of the proceeding broke. Chairs scraped back, papers shuffled, the quiet case of conclusion filling the room. Russell gathered her belongings with slow precision, each movement heavy with exhaustion. Her victory, a piece of paper worth $994, felt paper thin against the weight of what she had lived through. She tucked her receipts and photos back into their envelope, the evidence of her struggle now meaningless beyond this room. McNulty stood, his posture rigid. He didn't look at her, didn't glance at the gallery. He walked straight toward the exit, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with a mixture of shame and defiance. The door opened, then closed behind him, leaving the echo of his footsteps fading down the hallway. Russell followed minutes later, her daughter waiting at home, her future uncertain. She carried not triumph, but resolve. The knowledge that the dream of co-parenting had been reduced to a legal footnote, a judgment stamped with numbers that could never reflect the true cost. The audience dispersed, whispering about the case, about the headbutts, about the receipts waived and dismissed. To them, it was another episode, another slice of televised conflict. But for Russell and McNulty, it was aftermath. And for Judge Judy, it was closure. Her authority sealed the fate. Her words, sharper than any gavel, closed the chapter. She didn't promise healing. She didn't chase resolution. She delivered judgment, final and binding, leaving the wounds to mend, or not, on their own. The cameras blinked off. The courtroom emptied. The story ended not with justice as either party imagined, but with the irrevocable weight of a decision.